Here is a moment in every confrontation when power shifts. It does not shift when voices rise. It does not shift when fists clench. It shifts when someone begins to explain. You make a decision. Someone questions it. You feel the tension. And instead of standing still, you begin to justify. You add context. You add emotion. You add reassurance. You soften the edges. And without realizing it, you move from authority to defense. Machiavelli understood something that modern society tries desperately to ignore. Power is perception sustained by certainty. The moment certainty cracks, perception shifts. And explanation is often the sound of that crack. To explain is to seek acceptance. To justify is to seek permission. To overclarify is to signal doubt. When you feel the urge to explain yourself excessively, ask one simple question. Who are you trying to convince? If your decision is aligned with your values, why must it be validated externally? The need to explain comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being disliked. Fear of being rejected. Fear of conflict. Fear of losing connection. But fear is the enemy of authority. Power does not grow in the soil of fear. It grows in the soil of internal alignment. When you are aligned, your words are few. When you are unsure, your words multiply. Observe people in positions of real authority. They do not speak in paragraphs when a sentence will do. They do not scramble to repair every uncomfortable silence. They state their position and allow others to react. Silence is not weakness. Silence is weight. When you explain yourself too much, you remove that weight. You transform a statement into a negotiation. This is what I've decided. That is power. This is what I've decided, and I hope you understand, and I didn't mean to offend you, and maybe we can reconsider later. That is uncertainty. Uncertainty invites challenge. The psychology behind over-explaining is deeply rooted. Most people were raised in environments where they had to justify their needs. As children, they were questioned constantly. Why did you do that? Explain yourself. Give me a reason. Over time, they learned that safety comes from justification. They learned that to avoid punishment or disapproval, they must provide context. They must prove innocence. They must make others comfortable. And they carry this habit into adulthood. They justify boundaries. They justify ambitions. They justify silence. They justify success. They justify failure. They narrate their internal world to anyone who asks. But power is not built through exposure. It is built through containment. When you reveal your reasoning to everyone, you remove strategic depth. You make yourself readable. You hand people the blueprint of your mind. And once someone has your blueprint, they know where to apply pressure. Explanation is often an unconscious attempt to control perception. You think that if you just clarify enough, people will see you correctly. But the more you try to control perception, the more dependent you become on it. If your identity requires understanding from others to remain stable, it is fragile. True authority does not depend on being understood by everyone. It depends on being understood by yourself. There is a difference between clarity and defense. Clarity is brief. Defense is layered. Clarity stands alone. Defense seeks reinforcement. When someone challenges you and you feel the urge to add 5 more sentences, pause. That urge is not about communication. It is about insecurity. And insecurity is detectable. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to microsignals of doubt. A slight change in tone. An extra phrase. A nervous explanation. These signals communicate more than the words themselves. When you over-explain, you unconsciously position yourself lower in the hierarchy of the interaction. You are saying, I need you to agree for this to be valid. And the person who needs agreement holds less power than the person who does not. Consider this. When someone powerful sets a boundary, do they debate it? No. They state it. And the world adjusts. But when someone uncertain sets a boundary, they soften it immediately. I mean, it's not a big deal. I just feel like maybe, I don't want to cause problems. Every additional word weakens the original statement. This is not about being cold. It is about being centered. When you are centered, you do not rush to fill silence. You do not panic when someone frowns. You do not scramble to correct every misinterpretation. Not every misunderstanding requires resolution. Sometimes the most powerful move is to let someone misunderstand you. Why? Because chasing correction places you on defense. And defense is reactive. Machiavelli wrote in a world of ruthless politics, but his insights apply everywhere. In the workplace, in relationships, in negotiations, in leadership. The person who explains the most often loses the negotiation. If you state your price and immediately justify it, you are inviting debate. If you state your price and remain silent, you are anchoring reality. Silence creates gravity. When you speak and stop, others must respond within your frame. When you speak and continue speaking, you move into their frame. Power is not about domination. It is about frame control. Over-explaining shifts the frame. It signals that your position is flexible under emotional pressure. And people test flexibility. If someone senses that guilt makes you elaborate, they will use guilt. If someone senses that discomfort makes you justify, they will create discomfort. You train people how to treat you by how quickly you explain yourself. The more you defend, the more they attack. The more you justify, the more they question. The more you clarify, the more they demand. There is also an internal cost. Every time you over-explain, you reinforce the belief that your initial stance was not enough. You chip away at your own confidence. You condition yourself to doubt your first sentence. Over time, this becomes identity. You become someone who must constantly prove legitimacy. This is exhausting and unnecessary. Accountability is different. Accountability is chosen. It is deliberate. It is offered from strength. Defensiveness is reactive. It is rushed. It is rooted in fear. When you apologize because you truly made a mistake, that is power. When you apologize preemptively to avoid tension, that is weakness. When you clarify because alignment is needed, that is leadership. When you clarify because silence scares you, that is insecurity. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. A powerful person understands that explanation is a resource, and resources must be managed. Not everyone deserves access to your internal reasoning. Not everyone deserves the architecture behind your decisions. When you give that access freely, you reduce mystery. Mystery is not manipulation. It is strategic restraint. When people cannot fully predict you, they hesitate. When they cannot fully map your motives, they are cautious. When they cannot provoke you into excessive defense, they adjust. But when they know that a raised eyebrow will trigger a paragraph of explanation, they learn how to control you. Power is emotional stability under scrutiny. If scrutiny makes you talk too much, you are not yet stable. The discipline of speech is one of the most underestimated forms of strength. Say what is necessary. Remove what is unnecessary. Let silence do part of the work. The world does not collapse because someone feels uncomfortable with your boundary. It adjusts. And the people who demand constant explanation often benefit from your lack of power. They prefer you uncertain. They prefer you apologetic. They prefer you defensive. Because a defensive person is easier to influence. When you stop over-explaining, some people will react. They will say you have changed. They will call you distant. They will accuse you of arrogance. In reality, you have become contained. Containment is the architecture of power. When your words are measured, your presence expands. When your sentences shorten, your authority grows. When you no longer feel compelled to justify your existence, you send a message without saying it. I am not negotiating who I am. And that is where power begins. Power is not loud. It does not rush. It does not tremble under questioning. It does not seek applause. Power is steady. The steady person does not feel compelled to defend every angle of their thinking. They do not unravel their entire internal process for public inspection. They understand something fundamental. Not everyone has earned access to their reasoning. When you over-explain, you are not being transparent. You are overexposing your psychological interior. And exposure weakens strategic position. Imagine two individuals in a disagreement. The first speaks calmly, "This is my decision," and then remains silent. The second responds with, "Let me explain why. You see, the situation is complicated, and I didn't mean for it to come across that way, and I know you might think." Which one appears more stable? Which one appears more centered? Which one feels more difficult to move? The second person may have better logic. They may even be morally correct. But perception does not reward excessive justification. Perception rewards composure. Machiavelli observed that rulers who appeared indecisive quickly lost the loyalty of their followers. It was not necessarily the decision itself that caused weakness, but the visible hesitation behind it. Hesitation communicates doubt. Doubt invites challenge. When you explain too much, you reveal hesitation. You show that you are trying to manage the emotional response of the other person. And the moment you begin managing their emotions instead of holding your position, you shift from authority to appeasement. Appeasement is not leadership. Appeasement is fear disguised as kindness. There is a psychological mechanism at play here. When someone questions you, your nervous system activates. Your heart rate increases slightly. Your mind begins searching for justification. You feel the pressure to clear things up. But often, nothing is unclear. The only thing that exists is tension. And most people cannot tolerate tension. So they talk. They explain. They fill the air with reasoning. They try to dissolve discomfort through words. But tension is not inherently dangerous. It is simply energy. If you can sit inside tension without rushing to remove it, you gain control over the dynamic. The person who tolerates tension longer controls the interaction. This is true in negotiations. This is true in arguments. This is true in romantic relationships. This is true in leadership. The individual who can state a boundary and withstand the discomfort that follows has already won. Because they are not being moved. Over-explanation is movement. It is psychological shifting. It is the subtle repositioning of yourself in response to pressure. And once you move, the other person senses it. They learn that pressure works. They learn that discomfort makes you unstable. They learn that silence from them creates anxiety in you. This knowledge becomes leverage. Think carefully about how often you speak after you should have stopped. How often do you send an extra message after stating your position? How often do you add clarification after already being clear? How often do you explain your absence, your delay, your choice, your ambition, your refusal? Each extra sentence might feel harmless, but collectively, they shape your identity. They shape how others perceive you. They shape how you perceive yourself. If your pattern is to over-justify, you gradually internalize the belief that your natural state is insufficient. You begin to believe that your decisions require reinforcement. You begin to believe that silence is dangerous. But silence is not dangerous. Silence is control. The world conditions you to think otherwise. You are taught that communication solves everything. That vulnerability earns respect. That explaining yourself builds connection. In reality, over-communication often erodes mystique and authority. There is a difference between vulnerability and emotional leakage. Vulnerability is chosen and contained. Leakage is uncontrolled and reactive. When you over-explain, you leak. You leak fear. You leak insecurity. You leak your need for reassurance. Machiavelli understood that human beings respect what they cannot easily destabilize. If someone cannot provoke you into over-defending yourself, they lose a tool. If someone cannot force you into clarifying every accusation, they lose leverage. If someone cannot trigger guilt-driven explanation, they lose influence. Many people unconsciously use confusion as a tactic. They question your motives. They misunderstand you on purpose. They distort your words. Not because they truly need clarity, but because they want to see how much you will bend. If you rush to fix every distortion, you step into their game. You accept their frame. You begin proving instead of standing. And proving is endless. You can never fully prove your intention to someone committed to doubting it. You can never fully explain yourself to someone determined to misunderstand. The more you try, the deeper you sink. At some point, You must decide that your inner alignment matters more than their interpretation. This is not arrogance. It is sovereignty. Sovereignty means you are the authority over your own decisions, not the court of public opinion, not the emotional temperature of the room, not the fluctuating moods of others. When you explain excessively, you are outsourcing sovereignty. You are placing your stability in the hands of reaction. And reaction is unpredictable. A sovereign mind does not collapse under misinterpretation. It remains steady. It may correct once. It may clarify briefly. But it does not spiral into defensive monologues. There is strength in brevity. Short sentences carry weight. Long defenses carry doubt. When you speak with precision, you compress energy. When you ramble, you diffuse it. Energy diffused is power diluted. Energy compressed is power intensified. This is why powerful communicators often speak in concise phrases. They do not flood you with justification. They give you something solid, and then they allow silence to do the rest. Silence forces others to think. Silence forces others to confront their own reactions. Silence creates psychological space where authority can settle. But if you rush to fill silence, you remove that space. You rescue others from discomfort. You soften the impact of your own stance. And over time, people stop taking your initial statements seriously. Because they know an explanation is coming. They know that if they wait long enough, you will adjust. This is how boundaries erode. Not through dramatic betrayal, but through small, repeated justifications. A boundary stated once and defended repeatedly becomes negotiable. A boundary stated once and left standing becomes solid. The discipline required to resist over-explanation is not easy. It requires emotional regulation. It requires tolerance for being misunderstood. It requires tolerance for being disliked. It requires tolerance for silence. Most people would rather talk than feel. They would rather justify than endure discomfort. But endurance builds authority. If you want to increase your influence in any domain, begin with speech discipline. Before you speak, ask yourself, is this necessary? Does this add strength? Or does this dilute it? Often, the strongest response is the shortest one. Often, the most powerful statement is the one you refuse to elaborate on. You do not need to narrate your internal world to earn legitimacy. You do not need to explain every strategic move. You do not need to defend every silence. Your life is not a courtroom. You are not perpetually on trial. When you stop behaving as if you are being judged at every moment, your posture changes. Your tone changes. Your pace changes. You become slower. And slowness in speech signals confidence. Fast, nervous elaboration signals fear. This is observable everywhere. In interviews, in negotiations, in arguments. The person who rushes to justify usually feels cornered. The person who pauses usually feels grounded. Grounded people do not need to chase understanding. They allow it to come. And if it does not, they remain intact. There will always be people who want explanations not to understand you, but to control you. They want your reasoning because reasoning is leverage. If they know why you act, they know how to manipulate that why. If they know your emotional triggers, they know how to press them. If they know your fears, they know how to threaten them. Restraint protects you. Containment preserves depth. Mystery maintains edge. Machiavelli did not advocate reckless cruelty. He advocated awareness. Awareness that human beings respond to perceived strength. Awareness that indecision weakens. Awareness that too much exposure creates vulnerability. If you want to grow in authority, practice ending your sentences earlier. Practice allowing others to sit with ambiguity. Practice tolerating the urge to justify. The urge will rise. Your heart may race. Your mind will suggest additional phrases. Do not follow it. Let the sentence stand alone. Let the air remain heavy. Let others react without rescuing them. You will feel uncomfortable at first, because you are used to dissolving tension through words. But over time, something changes. People begin to adjust to your new standard. They test you less. They challenge you less. They interrupt you less. Because they sense containment. Containment is intimidating. Not because it is aggressive, but because it is immovable. When you become immovable in speech, you become immovable in presence. And presence is the core of influence. You do not need to dominate a room. You need to remain centered inside it. The less you explain unnecessarily, the more centered you become. And the more centered you become, the less anyone can move you. That is power. There is a reason silence unsettles people. Silence removes immediate reassurance. Silence removes emotional cushioning. Silence forces confrontation with reality. When you speak and then stop, you create a psychological vacuum. And in that vacuum, others are forced to reveal themselves. They show impatience. They show insecurity. They show anger. They show respect. But when you rush to explain, you collapse the vacuum. You give them relief. You reduce the pressure. Pressure reveals hierarchy. The person who can withstand pressure longer holds position. If a single raised eyebrow from someone makes you elaborate, you have just demonstrated fragility. If a short pause makes you clarify further, you have demonstrated dependence. Power is independence from immediate emotional reaction. It is the ability to remain stable when someone does not instantly agree. Think about how often you defend yourself in advance. Before anyone accuses you, you preemptively explain. Before anyone questions you, you clarify. Before anyone misunderstands you, you soften your stance. This anticipatory defense is a sign that you expect judgment. And when you expect judgment, you subconsciously accept a lower role in the dynamic. You become the one who must prove, the one who must justify, the one who must be careful. But powerful individuals do not live in anticipation of attack. They live in certainty of direction. If someone questions them, they assess calmly. If correction is needed, they correct. If not, they remain still. Remaining still is harder than speaking. Speaking relieves anxiety. Stillness magnifies it. But stillness builds gravity. Imagine a courtroom. Two individuals present their case. One speaks calmly, concisely, and stops. The other continues explaining long after the main point has been made. The second person may believe they are strengthening their argument. In reality, they are weakening perception. Excess explanation suggests that the foundation is unstable. If the foundation were solid, it would not need reinforcement. In everyday life, this principle manifests in subtle ways. When you send a message and then immediately follow it with another to clarify tone. When you apologize repeatedly for a simple boundary. When you overdescribe your reasons for choosing a path. When you justify your ambition to those who are uncomfortable with it. Each repetition chips away at authority. You may believe you are being considerate. But consideration that undermines position is self-sabotage. There is also a deeper existential dimension to this. Explaining yourself excessively often reflects a deeper fear, the fear of existing unapologetically. To exist unapologetically means accepting that some people will misunderstand you. It means accepting that some will disagree. It means accepting that you will not always be perceived as kind, fair, or agreeable. Most people cannot tolerate that. They would rather be liked than respected. But respect sustains influence longer than likability. Likability is fragile. It depends on mood, preference, and projection. Respect depends on consistency and firmness. When you over-explain, you prioritize likability. When you remain composed, you prioritize respect. And respect is the currency of long-term power. Machiavelli observed that a ruler must sometimes choose between being loved and being feared. Modern minds recoil at that phrasing, but the underlying truth remains. You cannot build durable authority solely on emotional comfort. People may enjoy your explanations. They may feel reassured by your justifications. But deep down, they respect certainty more than comfort. Certainty signals direction. Direction signals leadership. Leadership signals power. When you hesitate verbally, you signal that your direction can be influenced by reaction. Reaction becomes your compass. And once others realize that, they steer you. The discipline of not explaining unnecessarily is not about becoming cold or secretive. It is about mastering your impulses. It is about recognizing when you are speaking from strength and when you are speaking from fear. Fear speaks quickly. Strength speaks deliberately. Fear fills silence. Strength tolerates it. Fear defends preemptively. Strength responds selectively. The next time someone questions your decision, notice the impulse rising within you. Notice the tension in your chest. Notice the rapid thoughts assembling arguments. Pause. Deliver your answer simply. Then stop. Let them process. Let them react. Do not chase agreement. Do not chase comfort. Let the moment stretch. You may feel exposed at first, but exposure without collapse builds resilience. Over time, you will notice a shift. People interrupt you less. They challenge you less impulsively. They take your words more seriously, because you no longer dilute them. Words gain value when they are scarce. If everything is explained, nothing feels significant. If only what is necessary is spoken, each sentence carries weight. Power is partly the art of compression. Compressing emotion. Compressing language. Compressing reaction. Not in repression, but in refinement. Refined speech is strategic speech. It communicates intention without leakage. It signals control over self. And control over self is the foundation of control in any environment. Consider how many conflicts escalate because one party over-explains. They reveal vulnerability. The other senses it and presses harder. The dynamic becomes unequal. But if the first party had simply stated their stance and remained steady, the escalation might never have occurred. Because escalation often feeds on visible insecurity. When insecurity is absent, aggression loses momentum. This is why some individuals appear untouchable in debate. Not because they are louder, not because they are smarter, but because they are unmoved. Unmoved people are difficult to destabilize. Destabilization is the aim of many confrontations. If someone cannot destabilize you through accusation or doubt, they lose influence. Your composure becomes a shield. And shields are stronger when they are solid, not porous. Over-explanation creates pores. Each unnecessary detail is an opening. Each defensive sentence is a crack. Each anxious clarification is a weakness in structure. Structure matters. Structure in speech reflects structure in mind. When your mind is structured, your speech is measured. When your mind is chaotic, your speech overflows. The practice of measured speech trains measured thought. When you discipline your tongue, you discipline your nervous system. You become less reactive. Less reactive individuals are harder to control. And control is the ultimate stake in every power dynamic. If someone can control your emotional state, they control your behavior. If they can trigger you into explaining excessively, they influence your frame. If they can make you justify yourself repeatedly, they position you as subordinate. Breaking this cycle requires courage. The courage to be misinterpreted. The courage to be disliked. The courage to remain silent. The courage to say less than your mind wants to say. It requires accepting that not every battle must be fought verbally. Sometimes power lies in letting a false accusation stand without frantic correction. Sometimes power lies in declining to elaborate. Sometimes power lies in a simple sentence. That is my decision. And nothing more. When you master this restraint, you begin to notice something profound. You feel less exhausted. You replay conversations less often. You stop mentally drafting defenses for hypothetical scenarios. You reclaim mental bandwidth. Because you are no longer performing for approval. You are living from alignment. Alignment eliminates the need for excessive explanation. When you trust your own reasoning, you do not feel compelled to market it. When you trust your own values, you do not feel compelled to advertise them. When you trust your own boundaries, you do not feel compelled to soften them. Trust in self reduces verbal excess. And verbal restraint increases perceived authority. Machiavelli's insight, distilled into modern life, is not an invitation to cruelty or manipulation. It is an invitation to sovereignty. If you explain yourself constantly, you surrender sovereignty to perception. If you explain yourself selectively, you retain sovereignty. You decide when and how to reveal reasoning. You decide what remains private. You decide how much access others have to your interior. That decision alone shifts power. Because power is not granted. It is maintained. Maintained through composure. Maintained through restraint. Maintained through certainty. If you explain yourself too much, you are seeking to be accepted. If you speak clearly and stop, you are inviting others to accept reality. And reality bends more often to those who stand still than to those who plead. The ultimate transformation is internal. You move from needing understanding to offering clarity. You move from fearing judgment to tolerating it. You move from defending identity to embodying it. At that point, explanation becomes a tool, not a reflex. You use it when strategic. You withhold it when unnecessary. You are no longer compelled by anxiety to fill silence. Silence becomes an ally. And in that silence, authority grows. Because when you no longer feel the need to justify your existence, your choices, or your direction, you send a message more powerful than any explanation could ever deliver. You are not negotiating who you are. And when that message becomes visible in your posture, your tone, and your restraint, something shifts in every room you enter. People measure their words more carefully. They test you less frequently. They assume stability. And assumption of stability is the beginning of influence. Power is not gained by speaking more. It is gained by speaking precisely. And sometimes, the most powerful sentence you can say is a short one followed by nothing at all. Because when you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, you stop asking for permission to stand where you already belong. And that is the moment power returns. Power is not given, it is claimed. If you are ready to stop explaining and start leading, show your strength. Like this video, subscribe to Perpetual Echoes, and leave a comment below with the word sovereign to signal your commitment to your own authority. Join us, and let your silence speak for you.